across the north and the west. Temperatures above average still, 27 or 28.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello there, and a very warm welcome to Brazier with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin this week. And coming up, plenty of fast-paced news, as ever, from 4 until 6. And in this hour, reaction to the news that energy bills look set to soar once again, with the average household bill predicted to hit almost £4,000 a year from January, would you believe? Well, that's far higher than the £2,800 already forecast in May by energy regulator Ofgem. It will, of course, give more pain to the cost of living crisis gripping the country. Indeed, the rising costs on household bills comes as the owners of British Gas Centrica restarted its payouts to shareholders after profits of $1.34 billion. So, are we, the consumer, being ripped off? This evening, we'll see the battle for the North as the two Tory leadership hopefuls go head-to-head in Leeds in the first of their 12 hustings. Well, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak expected to talk levelling up and taxes once again as they try to encourage Conservatives in the traditional red wall areas. They're the right candidate to lead the country. The director of Northern Powerhouse, Henry Murison, will give his thoughts ahead of tonight's event. And more than 1.2 million people will be heading to Birmingham over the next 12 days as 6,500 athletes and officials join together for the biggest sporting programme in Commonwealth Games history. The opening ceremony now just under 3 hours away. We'll be crossing live to Birmingham as the atmosphere ramps up and hearing from a local woman who's got a very important job at the Alexander Stadium this evening. And with us for the next 2 hours, someone else who's got a very important job, author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton with us. Thank you. Great to see you.
My pleasure.
Also, the latest headlines as ever. Polly's got the details for us today.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon to you. The top story. A man has been given life in prison in a historic sentencing which was broadcast live on television for the very first time in the UK. Judge Sarah Munro QC's comments were streamed from the Old Bailey earlier on this morning, and she handed 25-year-old Ben Oliver a life sentence after he pleaded guilty to killing his grandfather.
The sentence I pass upon you is therefore one of life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 10 years and 8 months. From that term will be deducted the term you have spent on remand, which is 553 days. That deduction results in a term of 9 years and 63 days.
Well, in other news today, Conservative leadership candidates Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are going to face each other once again tonight, this time in Leeds. They're taking part in the first of 12 Tory hustings. Tax and spending, the main topics of contention as they take questions from party members. They'll both be hoping to secure votes before their summer tour of the country. And Sir Keir Starmer says frontbencher Sam Tarry was sacked from the shadow cabinet because he booked media appearances without permission and made up policy on the hoof. That comes after the shadow transport minister defied Sir Keir's ban on joining picket lines with striking rail workers. Train services are still disrupted today after yesterday's strike caused travel problems. Unions have announced a further strike this Saturday and on August the 13th. Sir Keir Starmer says trade unions will always be part of the Labour movement.
I think it's quite right for trade unions to stick up for their members and to fight for their members. Of course it is. And it's their members who are really struggling under this cost of living crisis. So, of course, trade unions are right to stick up for support and negotiate on behalf of their members. And I'm fully supportive of that and working with our trade unions.
The NHS is closing its only gender identity clinic for children and young people and replacing it with a regional network. That's after we were told that only having one provider is not a safe or viable long-term option. The contract for the Gender Identity Development Service at the Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust will be brought to a close. Workers at Britain's biggest and busiest container port have voted to strike in a dispute over pay. Members of the Unite Union backed industrial action at Felixstowe in Suffolk by 9-1. The union says an offer of a 5% pay rise is an effective wage cut because of the soaring rate of inflation. The leader of a gang who smuggled over £100 million in so-called dirty money out of the UK has been jailed for more than 9 years. In the biggest money laundering case of its kind, Abdullah Al-Falassi flew suitcases stuffed with cash to Dubai between April 2019 and December 2020. His mules carried up to £500,000 in each suitcase, alongside coffee and air fresheners to put sniffer dogs off the scent. It was part of a service the gang offered to launder money for dozens of drug dealers across the UK. The US economy shrank again in the last 3 months, raising fears of an approaching recession. The Commerce Department announced today gross domestic product decreased at an annual rate of 0.9% in the second quarter, after falling at an annual rate of 1.6% in the first 3 months. And a former Russian state journalist has been found guilty of discrediting the country's armed forces. Marina Ovsyannikova rose to prominence when she denounced the Russian invasion of Ukraine live on state television. She was fined for the offence and was in court for allegedly asserting the illegitimacy of the Russian war effort in posts online. She's been fined 50,000 rubles, which is just over £675. Those are your latest news headlines. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Brazier with Mark Longhurst.
Polly, thanks very much indeed. You are with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin all this week, and you are watching and listening to GB News on TV, online and, of course, digital radio. Now, as families in the UK continue to see prices soaring, news today that household energy bills could hit almost £4,000 a year by January. That's more than £1,000 higher even than Ofgem's predictions earlier this month. The National Energy Action Charity is warning that such a sharp rise will leave millions unable to heat their homes this winter. But whilst those bills are going up, the owners of British Gas, Centrica, well, they've resumed payouts to shareholders after reporting soaring profits of more than £1 billion for the first half of the year. The boss, Chris O'Shea, acknowledged that customers are facing what he called a difficult environment. But are we, the consumers, being ripped off by big business? The Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries spoke to GB News this morning and was questioned on this issue and what the government should be doing to support families.
Government is taking both a very serious and very coordinated approach to what we know is a serious problem as a result of what's happened in Ukraine, as a result of Putin's barbaric invasion. The government has, this is the top of the government's inbox list of priorities. We've put in measures in place. People have experienced that money, £1,200 for many people, into their bank accounts to help them deal with that problem right now. That is what the government's doing, and as the problem continues, then it's an issue we will continue to address. I can't tell you what policies are going to be put in place in the future. We've got a leadership competition taking place. We'll have a new Prime Minister on September the 5th. It was agreed that there will be no new policy announcements between now and then. And on September the 5th, this, I'm sure, will be the first problem to face a new Prime Minister.
Nadine Dorries speaking to GB News a little earlier from Birmingham. Top of the government's inbox, she said. Well, Andy Mayer's an energy analyst at the Institute for Economic Affairs and joins us now. Andy, thanks very much indeed. I think most customers will be looking at these Centrica profits and thinking, hold on, if they're making all that money, surely some should go back to the consumers rather than shelling out to the shareholders.
Well, some of it will be going back to the consumers because as profits rise, then the tax on profits has increased returns. So the picture for Centrica is the same as any other company. In a year that they're doing well, they make good profits and they give back to the country. And the years where they do poorly, which they have done in recent times, that doesn't happen. So the starting position for any company is a level playing field. We all get taxed if we're in business, and those business taxes and the income taxes on employees and everything else goes towards contributing dividends to the country from that success.
Yeah, that's sort of corporation tax. But as you know, there was discussion about a windfall tax. And what was said by Rishi Sunak, amongst others, we shouldn't really be imposing a windfall tax because it actually prevents them from investing in the industry and investing back in North Sea gas and oil. That's not happened. It's just gone straight to the shareholders.
I wish we would see some consistency from the former Chancellor and indeed the current administration on this point. Windfall taxes are generally a bad idea. The one time that that's not true is when it's correcting a policy mistake that the government themselves has made and trying to claw back some of the money that mistake has helped give to the companies. Well, in the case of oil and gas companies, there's no mistake. There's already windfall taxes on the North Sea, and those were in operation when the third windfall tax was brought in this year. So that didn't need to happen.
Right.
The policy mistake that they've made is on renewables, specifically old renewables, about 80% of which operate under something called the renewables obligation. And that means that companies like Centrica, Scottish Power and other renewable generators get profit margins that before the crisis were about 50%. After the crisis, they're shooting up 100%, 150%, 200%. These are things for which there is a case for a windfall tax because it's the government's own foolish error. And the reason they're not doing it is because they've got themselves into this totally crazy position where everything green is good and sainted and everything oil and gas needs to be punished. So they could do it. They could take these bills down a little bit, but they're not going to do it because they don't want to upset the Green lobby.
Right, OK. But I guess a lot of people at home will still be wondering how come Centrica can make, I think it's 1.34 billion profit in the first 6 months. Shell, the oil company, £1 billion profit for the same sort of period. We've seen petrol prices starting to come down a bit, but they're still really, really high.
Well, Shell is a global super major oil and gas company, most of whose operations are not in the UK. They're not the largest player in the North Sea anymore. They'd have no interest in fracking because it's too small a proposition for them. Centrica is, again, an international company, some of whose operations are not here. So those profits are for the entirety of the world. They're not just for the UK. And again, you have to look at the individual components as to whether or not something is the result of an unfair policy.
OK, well, let's look ahead to January. We've got these warnings of about 3,900 and upwards. I mean, do you share that sort of assessment of where we will be with the price cap?
Yeah, I think we published an estimate only this week and immediately it's out of date. I mean, this just is the brutal reality of where we are. Unless the government actually does something to increase domestic supplies of gas, we have no defence against these rising prices for the foreseeable future other than imports. And everybody wants the imports. We're competing with Europe, we're competing with Africa, we're competing with China. Everybody's bidding for the same stocks and resources. And what we know from the negotiations that have happened so far is the world's major producer, that's not Russia, Saudi Arabia, thinks they've reached capacity. That may not be true, but certainly you see Macron, for example, today meeting with the leader of Saudi Arabia in order to try and get the same kind of deal that Johnson tried to get last month. So it's a really difficult situation. But the one thing we could be doing, drilling more in the North Sea, onshore fracking, not overtaxing investors who want to do both of those things. We are not doing. We're doing the opposite, and they're dithering, as Nadine Dorries says, because they don't want to make any major policy announcements. Well, even that's not true. What the business secretary did in the last week was approve Sizewell C, a nuclear power station. Why on earth is it that he can approve a nuclear power station his own advisors told him not to do, but he can't get the fracking stuff moving? Doesn't make a lot of sense, and they are being skittish.
Andy, thank you very much indeed for your analysis of a pretty grim picture, but thank you anyway. Let's turn now to Christine's viewpoint on this, because clearly, you know, it's going to really hurt a lot of people, well, not just come January, come this autumn, and they'll be scratching their heads thinking, how can all these companies be making this profit and none of it's coming back to us?
Yeah, absolutely, and it was extremely interesting to hear the experts' analysis. I mean, the thing he said towards the end is something that I've and a lot of other people have been banging on about. They are obsessed with their green
lobby,
the green agenda, net zero. We should have been exactly North Sea oil fracking, etc. We should have been doing it years ago. Because we haven't, we're in the mess now. But no, I think you're right. I mean, of course, companies have to make a profit, and a lot of people don't understand that. Of course, they do, and they are worldwide companies, so that slightly puts the profit into perspective. But I honestly don't think most people have realised what is going to hit the country this winter. I really don't. And if we have a really cold winter, there are going to be millions of people who are in desperate situations, and they are going to have to be helped by the government. Some sort of furlough scheme for energy, as it were. You cannot let people freeze and starve. You can't.
Yeah, and not many other tools at their behest, of course, apart from falling. Anyway, we'll see what our experts say throughout the afternoon on that. But let's reflect too. We've also got this battle between the two Tory leadership hopefuls resuming this evening in the north of England. Now, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak will be going head-to-head in Leeds at the first of their 12 hustings. Well, tax, spending and, yes, energy costs likely to be key points of contention as the hopefuls embark on a summer tour of the country. How nice. Taking questions from party members who will ultimately decide who gets the keys to number 10 in September. Our political correspondent Tom Harwood joining us in the studio. Tom, the last television debate didn't quite go as planned on Talk TV, but the hustings are something a little different, even though I think Nick Ferrari's probably going to be in the chair tonight.
Yes, no, it's an interesting thing because people will hear the words the first hustings and think, well, haven't we seen a whole host of different debates? Well, these are the first hustings organised by the Conservative Party. A smorgasbord of different media companies have organised televised hustings over the last 2 weeks, but this is the first of 12 official Conservative Party hustings that are done in each of the regions and nations of the United Kingdom. So the first one is in Leeds, where Liz Truss grew up. Perhaps she'll have a bit of a home advantage there. But interestingly, the audience there, only Conservative Party members, paying Conservative Party members, because they've had to pay to attend these hustings as well as being members.
So you don't think awkward questions, then?
So I think it's less likely that we'll see personal questions. And we've seen a lot of personal tit-for-tat in the last couple of weeks when it came to those debates in different media companies. But because the Conservative Party is hosting this, and the same thing happened in 2019, they were slightly drier affairs, focusing more on policy and less on personality.
We'll have to rely on Nick Ferrari to liven things up then, won't we?
Well, and that's likely to happen. But, I mean, clearly, the difficult questions for both of them on these energy issues, which are really starting to come to the surface now.
Certainly, and we've seen that these candidates have been asked on the issue of energy a number of times, not so much in the debates, but more in other media interviews. Now, Liz Truss is sticking to her script that she'd scrap those green levies temporarily, that she'd reverse the national insurance tax hike, and Rishi Sunak has now done a U-turn in terms of policy. Another interesting fact about
the
this hustings
on fuel,
is this will be the first time both candidates have been in the same room together since Rishi Sunak has announced his policy that he would scrap temporarily VAT on fuel. And that's going to be a really interesting point of contention, because for weeks upon weeks, Rishi Sunak has been saying we can't afford tax cuts, it would be irresponsible to do tax cuts, it would be placing debt on future generations, and I will not do this until inflation is under control. And then 2 days ago, he announces that he will indeed cut taxes. Perhaps that will be a stick with which Liz Truss might beat him.
Does she need to? She's so far ahead. Can't she just be extremely statesmanlike about it and ignore it?
Well, that will be the temptation. But the interesting thing is we haven't had a single poll of Conservative Party members since Rishi Sunak announced his VAT pledge. Now, he might have sunk further. He might have looked like someone who U-turned, someone who's less principled. Or indeed, it might have made people think, well, maybe this guy will cut taxes after all. Perhaps he's gone up in the opinion polls. We haven't seen any data to back that up yet. So it will be really interesting when that does eventually materialise. What we have seen is that in every debate in the last couple of days, Liz Truss, amongst Conservative voters, amongst Conservative members as well, she seems to be doing very well, and Rishi Sunak is struggling to change the narrative.
Tom, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, let's turn now to the thoughts of Henry Murison, who's the director of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. Henry, thanks for joining us. I suspect this might be a bit awkward, as we've heard about energy costs levelling up and so on, and the words Northern Powerhouse. We haven't heard that from either, it seems.
So I think we are going to see in Leeds some significant commitments from the candidates. Both have said to Ben Houchin, the Metro Mayor of the Tees Valley, that they support Northern Powerhouse Rail in full. And in her comments to the Northern Agenda newsletter produced by Rob Parsons and his colleagues at Reach, the owners of the Manchester Evening News, the Journal in Newcastle, and numerous other papers across the north of England, that she wants to build the new line across the Pennines in full, not the version which Boris Johnson cut back. So I think on issues like transport policy, we're likely to see some U-turns actually on the government's kind of historic decisions over the last couple of years in order to do more on those issues that matter to us at the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, those issues that are absolutely the core of levelling up. Because if you don't improve the connectivity of cities like Leeds, Bradford, where I'm sitting now, of Manchester, across to Liverpool, up to the northeast, Newcastle, Darlington, Middlesbrough, you're not going to get the full opportunities that people down in the south of England have. So yes, we still need to see more on education, more on skills, more devolution. But I think even in this current kind of dying embers of a government, we are probably going to see more devolution deals. I think we're expecting one just down the road from where I'm sitting in North Yorkshire and York in literally a few days' time, potentially on Yorkshire Day on the 1st of August. So I think that we're expecting quite a lot tonight, actually, to come out of the debate, and particularly on transport, potentially a big bloody nose for the Prime Minister, with very recent decisions that he took whilst at number 10 being rejected by those that want to follow him.
OK, so another U-turn, which would be quite exciting for all the journalists there. But let's analyse that in a bit more detail, because I think what Liz Truss is talking about is this, as you say, a line going from Liverpool and Hull across the Pennines. And, you know, transport links to the Pennines have been criticised for many years. And that would link with HS2 and the two coastal lines as well. So quite joined-up thinking.
So what we saw in the Integrated Rail Plan was that the Prime Minister cut back the aspirations. So you only had HS2 on the western leg, not on the eastern leg. So Leeds, Sheffield would miss out on HS2. We actually aren't necessarily going to see the restoration of the eastern leg tonight, despite the fact that as well as poor connectivity down to Birmingham, as well as London, it also causes some issues because you can't really improve connectivity between Leeds and Sheffield without some investment there, and without HS2, that's gone entirely. But on that section across the Pennines, this afternoon, I know that Arj Singh at the I newspaper has just broken that he hasn't been able to get absolutely kind of sort of I's and T's kind of dotted and crossed, but he's trying to get to the bottom of exactly what Liz Truss means. So on the new line across the Pennines, Boris Johnson's offering us Warrington to Marsden, which is a lovely village when you just get to Yorkshire. So it's a wonderful place, but not necessarily where I would finish a rail line.
Right, calling at several other places, on the way. Anyway, we should see what
Liz Truss may offer us something better, something more, but we're not sure yet whether we'll get that new station in Bradford that was always part of the Northern Powerhouse Rail plans and the other things that we are genuinely needing if we're going to be able to close that north-south divide.
Okay. But the ticket may cost £43 billion, we're told. Anyway, we shall see. Henry, as ever, thanks for your opinion on that, and we'll see what emerges tonight, of course, in Leeds. Now, legal history made today as the sentencing of a manslaughter case took place live on television for the first time ever in the UK. It was the case of 25-year-old Ben Oliver, who pleaded guilty to killing his grandfather in South London last year. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, outside the Old Bailey, where it all happened for us. And, Mark, legal people are quite excited about this, but I have to say, it wasn't great telly, was it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it was pretty harrowing in nature, and the judge did go into a great deal of detail about the tragic upbringing of this young man, the fact that he was physically and sexually abused as a young man, that he had been suicidal, that he'd gone on to offend himself and was convicted of child sex abuse, of rape, of assault, was sent to jail, and then in his time in jail was further abused and assaulted by inmates there. A really tragic picture that was painted of this young man, who then went on to stab to death his grandfather, David Oliver, who was stabbed to death at their house in South London in January of last year. Now, it was a manslaughter guilty plea that he pleaded to at an earlier hearing that was accepted by the court on the grounds of diminished responsibility, because of the fact that he also suffered from mental health issues and from autistic spectrum disorder. That was taken into consideration by the judge as a mitigating factor, which meant that she was able to reduce the very hefty jail term that she was originally intending to hand down, jail term instead of life, with a minimum of just around 10 years in jail before he can then apply for parole. This is what that judge, Sarah Munro QC, said in her sentencing remarks.
The sentence I pass upon you is therefore one of life imprisonment with a minimum term of 10 years and 8 months. From that term will be deducted the term you have spent on remand, which is 553 days. That deduction results in a term of 9 years and 63 days. Those numbers can be amended administratively if my calculation is incorrect.
Mark, as you were saying, it's a really difficult watch, and many sort of tuning in for it might have thought, God, this is quite difficult to actually take on board. But is that the point, that they wanted the public to understand what a judge has to take on board when they sentence people?
That's exactly the point, Mark. That is what the judiciary was hoping would be the upshot of their decision to allow cameras in court. They have been resistant for many years. There's been a campaign by the main broadcasters to allow cameras in court, but the judiciary were determined that we wouldn't see full trials televised, as we do see in some countries around the world, including the United States, where some of these trials are really quite sensational in nature. Well, the judiciary, for obvious reasons, don't want to see that in this country. Neither do many within the legal profession, and of course victims advocates, who feel that that would have a detrimental effect on the proper course of justice, that victims would be further traumatised if they thought that their case was being televised. Those giving evidence as witnesses might be put off from doing so if they thought it was going to be televised. So that's why it's restricted. It's the very end of the trial process, Mark, allowing the sentencing remarks of the judge to be heard, which can go in, as we heard, into quite a bit of detail, graphic detail about the crime itself and the mitigating and the aggravating circumstances. And the very important point is, as you mentioned there, to highlight how difficult and complex this sentencing procedure is. All of the factors that a judge has to weigh up when deciding how long someone should stay behind bars.
Mark at the Old Bailey, thanks very much indeed for updating us on that. Let's get the reaction of Christine with us in the studio. Justice seen to be done. And I guess, you know, the papers have criticised judges for what they see as crazy comments or sentences. This may go some way to sort of filling in the gaps and the context of these cases.
Absolutely, and I think you're absolutely right. Justice must be seen to be done, and it would be grotesque if we went down the American route. Of course it would, has just been outlined. But just to see the judges summing up, bringing in all the, what was it, the aggravating and the mitigating circumstances, I think was absolutely right, and I think it's a very good precedent. I was delighted, if I can be sexist for a moment, to see that it was a lady judge who takes the slot in history.
Well,
but of course, there is a precedent because the Court of Appeal and the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court can already be televised. So it isn't the first time courts have been televised. But no, and I think this, harrowing as it was, horrendous case, was actually a very good example of why this is such a good idea.
Do you think we'll go as far as America, where, you know, it's that we remember O.J. Simpson, the sort of celebrity bit?
It's just not the British way. No, I absolutely don't. I mean, I shall be dead long before it happens. I don't think it ever will.
Yeah. And one of the criticisms to prevent it happening was that QCs and barristers would play to the gallery and try and make themselves stars. I mean, again, perhaps not the British way.
Well, some of them already do, even in the confines of the court. They play to the gallery. But it's just so anti-British, that whole thing. If you think back to O.J. Simpson and the, oh dear, what was his name? Not Tom Cruise. You know who I mean. The film star.
Oh, right, yes,
Amber Heard and Johnny Depp.
Johnny Depp and Amber Heard with the...
Supposing we'd had the Wagatha Christie trial televised, can you imagine?
Interesting point, actually, because the two of them, Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, have crossed swords in a British court and an American court, handled very differently, wasn't it?
Very
quite
differently.
Right, yeah. Christine, as ever, thank you for being with us this afternoon. Let's just remind you, you're watching and listening to me, Mark Longhurst, in for Colin this week with GB News on TV, online and digital radio. And still to come, in under 3 hours now, in this afternoon, Birmingham celebrating the launch of the Commonwealth Games, the opening ceremony getting underway there with more than 1.2 million people descending on the city in the next 12 days. We'll be live in the heart of the celebrations next. We're back in a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Latest news headlines on GB News. Judge Sarah Monroe, QC, has made legal history in the first ever broadcasting of a criminal trial sentencing. Her comments were publicly screened from the Old Bailey in London in a manslaughter case today. She sentenced Ben Oliver to life in prison with a minimum of 10 years to serve after he pleaded guilty to killing his grandfather in South London. Also today, Conservative leadership candidates Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss will face each other once again, this time tonight in Leeds. They'll be taking part in the first of a series of 12 Tory hustings. Tax and spending likely to be the main topics of contention as they take questions from party members. They'll both be hoping to secure votes before their summer tour of the country. The NHS is closing its only gender identity clinic for children and young people and replacing it with a regional network. That's after an independent review criticised the Tavistock clinic, saying it needed to be transformed. The contract for gender identity development services at the Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust are to be brought to a close. And holidaymakers are facing 2-hour queues at the Port of Dover today amid warnings this weekend will see even longer delays. Check-in and border control for cross-channel crossings are once again suffering delays and disruption. That's after tens of thousands of families waited up to 6 hours at Dover last weekend. The 22nd Commonwealth Games will start in Birmingham tonight. The opening ceremony, which begins at 8 p.m. in the Alexander Stadium, will be attended by the Prince of Wales, and Tom Daley is among those carrying the Queen's baton to kick off the Games. Those are the headlines. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News, where now it's time for Brazier with Mark Longhurst.
Polly, thank you for that. Yes, it's me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin all this week, and you're watching and listening to GB News on TV, online and digital radio. Oh, we like that, don't we? I think we'll be showing you that again in a moment, because we're just hours away, as you've heard from Polly, from the opening ceremony of the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. 30,000 people attending the ceremony in the Alexander Stadium, an event which has been directed by the creator of Peaky Blinders, Stephen Knight. Well, more than 1.2 million people descending on the city over the next 12 days, some 5,000 athletes competing for 280 medals. The action taking place in 15 venues across the West Midlands. Just one, the track cycling down at the Lee Valley Velodrome in London. Well, earlier, Prime Minister Boris Johnson spoke about the importance of the Games for the Midlands.
The Commonwealth Games begin, the biggest sporting event ever in the West Midlands, and you can feel the excitement here in this mighty city of Birmingham, because the athletes are already here in their thousands from 56 countries, 72 nations and territories around the world. The venues are ready, sold out, million tickets already gone. The fantastic new Alexander Stadium all done up and ready. And the 1,875 Birmingham-forged medals are nestling in their velvet cases, ready to be draped around the perspiring necks of the exultant victors.
Boris Johnson getting very excited, and why not? Let's join Will Hollis live in Centenary Square in Birmingham, where I guess a lot of other people are getting excited too, Will.
Yeah, very much so. As Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, just said then, 72 nations worth of people are coming here. It's about 5,000 athletes, and all of the people that come with him, the friends and the family as well. And it's not just those big nations that we know about in our day-to-day conversations, like Australia and New Zealand and Canada. There's also Caribbean nations that are so intrinsically connected to places like Birmingham and the surrounding West Midlands area. But some of the places that you might not have ever heard of, they're also sending athletes here. Places like Norfolk Island in the South Pacific, an island nation of only a few thousand people, sending 2 or 3 different athletes. Now, where we are right now in Victoria Square, this is essentially the hub for all of the different activities that are going to be happening, the kind of nucleus, particularly for the fans that have come from around the world, as well as from around Birmingham. Of course, there are those big stadiums across the West Midlands where all your athletics and the boxing and the lawn bowls are going to be taking place, but it's fan zones like this where the people who live in Birmingham, who work in Birmingham, it might be on a lunch break, that they get to come out and have a bit of a watch of what's happening on these big screens. It's there where the party is really going to be, and lots of people in the square behind us. We were up there about an hour ago for the last hits that we did with Darren, and it was so busy that we thought we better come down here where it's a little bit quieter, just so we could hear ourselves think. Of course, everybody is looking towards this evening around 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at the Alexander Stadium, as Boris just said, the newly renovated Alexander Stadium, where all the pomp and pageantry of British culture is going to be celebrated. We're going to see the royalty there as well, opening the ceremony, and it's going to look fantastic. It's going to be on your screens throughout the next 11 days from today, 10 days worth of games, and Birmingham is going to be put on the map in a way that it has never been before.
Even with Peaky Blinders. Indeed, Will, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for joining us there in an increasingly busy square, a little quieter, as you said, than it was earlier. Let's see what Christine's looking forward to, because we've got not just the Commonwealth Games, we've got the footy this weekend as well. And these things do actually sort of bring the nation together, don't they?
Oh, I think they do. I mean, I'm not a natural footy fan, but I got incredibly excited. I was leaping up and down. When they got that fourth goal, I just couldn't believe it, and I can't wait for is it Sunday night. But I'm also incredibly enthused about the Commonwealth Games, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. And the soft power of the Commonwealth is so important. I mean, 56 nations, and they mentioned some of the ones now. Is it Norfolk Island?
Norfolk Island.
I mean, that's just going to be tear-jerking when there one or two people walk in. But, you know, places are queuing up to join. I mean, Gabon is apparently the 56th member. Yeah. And it's an incredibly important grouping. And they just want democracy, peace, prosperity. And I think it's time that we shifted our focus from Europe and, you know, France and Germany with their sort of protectionist racket, basically, and turn to the Commonwealth, which is the most amazing organisation.
And it's still very close to the Queen's heart, isn't it? I mean, the suggestions that maybe Prince Charles and Prince William are not quite as enthused about the sort of whole issue of you know, what some see as a colonialist past.
Well, I mean, I don't think it is. And the very fact that countries queuing up, flocking to join and to apply, I think we get further and further away from the colonialist past. I mean, you know, India is the biggest member, I think, which obviously there is a colonial link there. But I think we're getting rid of that. If Prince Charles and Prince William can't see the value of the Commonwealth after tonight, then they need their heads examining, because I think it's a truly, and the soft power that this little tiny island influences throughout the world is incredible. And the Commonwealth has a lot to thank for that.
And let alone, of course, the medals that they might be able to win as well.
Absolutely. Struck in Birmingham.
Oh, well,
by the way, aren't we going to miss
in velvet
Boris?
boxes,
I mean,
no
that
less.
that was, you know, a perfect classic Boris, that speech. It was great.
You're with me, Mark Longhurst, in for Colin this week on GB News, on TV, online and digital radio. And coming up later this afternoon, our view on why big business may be accused of creating greedflation. That's the new word out there, as prices and bills just keep on rising for us consumers. The parent company British Gas making huge profits, but the money going straight to the shareholders, it seems, not us, the consumers. We'll be giving our take on whether we're being fleeced by greedy corporations. And in the debate this hour, was Sir Keir Starmer right to sack his shadow transport minister for speaking on an RMT picket line? Ilford South's MP Sam Tarry attended the protest at London's Euston Station yesterday. We'll have more reaction in a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin all this week on GB News, on TV, online and digital radio. Now, you might be forgiven for thinking that you've heard so much about inflation these past few days that you're about to blow up yourselves with it all. The bogey word has been at the heart of the economic battles between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. Well, also joining the field of battle, we've had stagflation. Mr Sunak warning of a return to those conditions of the 1970s, a stagnant economy, but rampant or embedded inflation with it. Well, now let's give a very warm welcome to their not-so-distant cousin, greedflation, it seems, because no less a body than the Daily Telegraph, remember, often referred to as the Tory graph, this morning took big business to task for seemingly picking our pockets while blaming the evils of inflation. The paper's columnist Ben Marlow tagging it as, yes, greedflation. Well, Ben found McDonald's decision to inflate the cost of cheeseburgers by 20% to £1.19 sticking in his throat. He also found it hard to swallow Unilever's arguments that cost pressures had forced them to put up their prices by 11.2% when they were enjoying profit margins of 17% still on their products, including Durex condoms and Nurofen headache tablets. Well, strangely, I did feel a bit of a tension headache coming on because as I was reading his column on the train this morning, the latest news then broke about Centrica's profits, the parent company of British Gas making profits of $1.34 billion for just the first part of this year. Wonder where they made all that from. Well, then, just like buses, another one came along, Shell announcing profits of £10 billion. And I seem to remember the last time I filled up at Shell, it was £1.87 a litre, while Asda was only £1.81 down the road. Enough to want you to take a break, I thought, as I considered a mid-morning snack to help the headache. No, literally that moment. More breaking news on my phone. Nestlé's, the maker of Kit Kat, announcing its prices were going up 6.5%. And don't get me going on the fact they also produce Cheerios. Cheerio to Nestlé, maybe. But there is a serious point to all this. As Liam's observed in On the Money, many smaller businesses across Britain are really against the wall, trying to absorb their higher costs without pushing up the prices ruinously for customers. But as the Telegraph observed, it seems some of the world's largest corporations appear to be using the current conditions as a cover to push up prices to a level they wouldn't get away with otherwise. But there are some big bosses who've blown the whistle on this. Richard Walker, the boss of Iceland, calling on firms to accept lower profits to help everyone. It now has a line of £1 frozen food products available, even though some of those are currently loss-making. Why does all this matter? Because as British Gas and Shell count their cash, maybe splash out in a few Kit Kats too to celebrate, our energy bills are now estimated to a price cap of £3,850 a year by next January. Remember, the figure in October last year was just £1,400. And the TUC has said all these price increases are an insult to people struggling to get by, observing that energy bills have risen 23 times faster than wages. A Nurofen tablet, anyone? Well, I'm afraid I haven't got a Nurofen tablet or a Kit Kat to offer you, Christine, but am I getting a bit, perhaps, too judgmental?
Aerated about it? No, I don't think you are. When you told me about Kit Kats, I nearly fell off my stool. I love Kit Kats. The thing that really annoys me about all this is that there's somebody called Alan Jope, who is the big boss boy of Unilever.
Yeah.
And last year, he gave himself a 42% pay rise. He got 4.9 million, let's call that 5 million, shall we, last year, and yet he has refused to give a pay increase to his workers. Now, he got 42%. Now, OK, it's a very big job, it's an enormous company, but actually to give yourself 42%, what about examples from the top? I mean, their profit margins, you said 17%.
17%, yeah. And obviously, you know, all these companies have to give money to shareholders. That's how the whole game works. But when we're in the position that we are, when Iceland say, well, look, let's just hold back a bit. You know, these are emergency measures, emergency times, and think differently, maybe, just for a year or two.
No, I think he is a shining example. I understand that the supermarkets across the board are making profit margin is sort of 1 to 3%. Now, if they can manage, they have shareholders too. Why can't Unilever?
Yeah.
And there was that wonderful battle. I don't know the details, but Heinz were putting up. Other brands are available. Heinz were putting up the cost of their
baked
beans or whatever, and I think it was Tesco who said no.
Absolutely.
But they have now apparently come to an agreement. So whether Heinz, I don't know whether Heinz have dropped their prices, but good for Tesco saying no. We are not going to pass this on to our customers.
Yeah, the customer's always right. Or are they? Yeah.
Are they?
Christine, for the moment, thank you for that. Time now for the debate this hour. Labour's Shadow Transport Minister Sam Tarry sacked yesterday after joining that rail strike picket line and conducting unauthorised media interviews. That was the reason given by Labour. Well, Sir Keir Starmer explained his decision a little earlier.
Sam Tarry was sacked because he booked himself onto media programmes without permission and then made up policy on the hoof. And that can't be tolerated in any organisation because we've got collective responsibility. So that was relatively straightforward.
Well, unions and senior figures with Labour reacting angrily to that sacking. So we're asking, was Sir Keir Starmer right to push Mr Tarry into the sidings? We're joined by former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards, and still with us, author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton. First of all, let me ask you, Peter, do you buy this line from Labour that it wasn't the fact he joined the picket line, it was the fact he broke shadow cabinet protocol by speaking to the cameras?
Well, that's both absolutely right and incredibly technical, and I suspect when history is written, part of that will not be included in the argument. But of course, collective responsibility, although that sounds like a grand concept, you know, that just means everyone on the front bench, i.e. who speaks to a specific department, sticks to an agreed line. And that might sound technical, but it's important about keeping everyone on the same page. But of course, what you have is a picture of Sam Tarry on a picket line, even if the actual reason given, however legitimate, is a bit more of a technical detail of how parliamentary oppositions work.
Yeah, but Mr Tarry, and let's remember his partner Angela Rayner, will have known exactly what he was doing. This was not an accident.
Well, both sides will know exactly what they're doing. So Sam Tarry, I have some sympathy for him. He worked for the TSSA before. His union's headquarters was at Euston, literally next door to where he was pictured yesterday. He will have been well aware of the consequences. And Keir Starmer will have been also when he went into the news yesterday morning. So this will come as a surprise to no one. The question really is what happens next, because I think it is a great shame when you see a colleague sacked, but Sam Tarry is an articulate, intelligent guy. To me, and there's a big debate about how much of a role trade unions play in the Labour Party. The trade unions should play a very significant role in the Labour Party, so I don't want to see a weakening of relationships on the back of this.
Right, Christine, I mean, that's the big point, isn't it? That this could actually be very difficult for Labour if there's going to be a general election in maybe 18 months or less. Labour's links to the unions and how much the unions control Labour.
Well, as I understand it, that Unite are the biggest union donors. But to go back to Sam Tarry, as I understand it, he's going to be fighting deselection in his own constituency. So he needed to do something to appeal to the far left. And, of course, this would have been perfect. And if he hadn't joined the picket line, that would have been one more stick to beat him with. So he's kind of fighting for his basic political life, i.e. remaining as an MP. So just a sort of temporary disruption of being kicked off the shadow cabinet probably doesn't matter to him very much. And I'm sure if Angela Rayner ever takes over, he'll be back in like a shot. But what I find annoying about this whole railway business is two things, really. First of all, I do have some sympathy with the people who are striking, because they are not the people who are getting the headline wages of 80,000 average. Those are the train drivers. This is not what the strike is about. These are the people, as I understand it, whose average is kind of 24,000. And, you know, they're just trying to keep up with inflation. And this is what always happens when you have inflation. And we've got the ports coming next, and it's a domino effect, and it will just go on as long as we have inflation. But they haven't put the decision to vote to their members, as I understand it. And that was, of course, Scargill's big decision, and he basically destroyed the NUM because he wasn't democratic about it.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Peter, I mean, the government is in a bit of a limbo at the moment, of course, but we've got Grant Shapps seemingly stepping back from this and trying to get the train companies and Network Rail to come to the agreements. But that also seems to be the position for Keir Starmer. He doesn't really want to get involved in this.
I wouldn't say that Keir Starmer doesn't want to get involved, and there's 7 or 8 unions affiliated with Labour. Keir Starmer has good relationships with many of them. I think it's right that, as leader of the opposition, you try and straddle this line of both showing solidarity with working folk who are in trade unions who've had real terms pay cut, but also standing up for the rights of rail passengers. And to me, they're often the same group, because people in the unions are their mums and dads, they're renters, they've got mortgages to pay and everything else, and there's no reason why people in unions should have a pay cut. So I wouldn't say Keir Starmer wants to stay out of it. I think Grant Shapps, briefly, the issue is that he was very rude at the start of the rail strikes, insulting working folk on the railways, saying they were selfish, not attending the negotiations with Network Rail or with Tim Shoveler, the chief negotiator, planning his leadership bid, which collapsed within a matter of minutes. And now the suggestion that Grant Shapps, halfway through the summer, might bother to get involved. You know, lots of this would be avoidable if perhaps the Conservatives took some of the acrimony out of the debate and were willing to talk in a measured way to trade union leaders who represent hundreds of thousands of workers.
Or quickly, just to put the other point of view, perhaps if the union puts a deal to its membership rather than just to 600 representatives. But anyway, we shall see how things develop.
The representatives are elected, though, I must say. The representatives are elected by rank-and-file union members. They're not appointed like people in Quangos.
Yeah. OK, well, thank you for your views on that. We'll see, of course, what emerges with the next train strike, which will be coming along not too far down the line.
Saturday, I think.
Yeah. Christine, thanks too for your views on that. But let's just reflect that in just over 2 hours' time now, the clock's ticking. Birmingham to open the Commonwealth Games with a spectacular ceremony celebrating the city and the region at the Alexander Stadium. More than 1 million people descending on the city for 11 days of sport, athletes representing 72 nations and territories, including the Norfolk Islands, remember, competing across 19 different sports. But the event, not just about sport, it's about shining a light on the area and the community too. Thousands of local people getting involved, volunteering, taking part in activities across the 2 weeks. Well, Amy Deakin, a marshal at the opening ceremony tonight, joining us now from outside the stadium. Amy, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. You've got all the gear on. Are you excited?
I'm absolutely buzzing. I can't wait. We've been here since just after midday, and there's a proper activity going on at the moment. It's like a pressure cooker. It's great.
And what exactly are you going to be doing as a marshal? What will your duties be?
So our particular group, there's 400 of us, will be surrounding the track in the stadium as the athletes come in for the opening ceremony, and we will be dancing. So, yeah, pulling out our best moves for the Commonwealth nations.
Have you been practising that?
Yeah, plenty. We've done about 75 hours of training in the lead up to this. So we're in the opening and closing ceremines. Lots of hard work, but all fun.
Is it going to be really nasty of me to ask you to give us a quick preview and show us what's in store?
So let's just say there's some big Birmingham bands involved. There's some special dance moves. There's a special handover with the baton. And there'll be fireworks. So you're going to have to watch, I'm afraid. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of money has been sunk into it, £778 million. Do you think we're going to see where the money has gone? Because it's not just about the games, it's about the regeneration and the legacy it leaves as well.
You can't really put a value on it. So for me personally, from a selfish perspective, this is once in a lifetime opportunity, and that's priceless. In regards to the infrastructure and what I've been seeing happening around the region, then the impact that's going to have is a long-term impact. And the jobs that it's created, the skills that it's developed, it's definitely going to help the region and improve the country's status across the world. So I think it's worth it. But yeah, let's see what happens after it all kicks off.
Yeah, and what are you most looking forward to? I mean, Dina Asher-Smith has actually got a hamstring strain, but it's still Adam Peaty, Laura Kenny, and we've got the sort of the men's sprint relay team who might do quite well as well.
I'm a netball fan, so for me it's all about the netball. I've got tickets to the final and the bronze medal match, so I'm just gagging for that to happen. And yeah, the atmosphere that'll be around the stadium, it's just going to be phenomenal. So any sport that's on that I can watch in between working, I'll be there watching it.
OK, Amy, as ever, thank you for your time. Enjoy it, and we'll be looking out for your dancing. This is going to be another highlight that, of course, we've got to put on our schedule. Thanks very much indeed for joining us in Birmingham. With me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin this week on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello there, and a very warm welcome back to Brazier with me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin this week. Coming up, live at 5, a warning that energy bills could once again soar this year. The average household bill could hit almost £4,000 a year from January, it's predicted. That's far higher than the £2,800 originally forecast back in May by the energy regulator Ofgem. Despite the pain facing families, the owners of British Gas Centrica restarting payouts to shareholders after bumper billion-dollar profits. We'll ask the energy expert Malcolm Grimston, are we, the consumer, being ripped off? Leeds is the focus for the first leadership hustings as Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak try to build support in the north, battling it out to be our next Prime Minister. Levelling up, taxes and, yes, those energy bills expected to be on the agenda as the two candidates try to encourage Conservatives in the traditional red wall areas that they are the right candidates to lead the country. The thoughts of political commentator Tim Montgomery coming up. And now less than 2 hours away from that opening ceremony of the Commonwealth Games 2022. All eyes on Birmingham. More than 1.2 million people descending on Britain's second city over the next 12 days. We're joined by one of the groups benefiting from the legacy, the Sandville Aquatic Centre, the only brand new venue being handed over to the local community. And with us too for the next hour, author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton. A very warm welcome to you. Thanks for being with us. First though, latest news headlines. Here's Polly.
Mark, thank you. The top stories on GB News today. A man has been given a life sentence in prison in a historic sentencing type, which was broadcast live on television for the very first time in the UK. Judge Sarah Monroe QC's comments were streamed live from the Old Bailey earlier on this morning. She handed 25-year-old Ben Oliver a life sentence after he pleaded guilty to killing his grandfather.
The sentence I pass upon you is therefore one of life imprisonment with a minimum term of 10 years and 8 months. From that term will be deducted the term you have spent on remand, which is 553 days. That deduction results in a term of 9 years and 63 days.
And in other news today, Conservative leadership candidates Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss will once again face each other tonight, this time in Leeds. They're taking part in the first of a series of 12 Tory hustings. Tax and spending likely to be the main topics of contention as they take questions from party members. They'll both be hoping to secure votes before their summer tour of the country. Sir Keir Starmer says frontbencher Sam Tarry was sacked from the shadow cabinet because he booked media appearances without permission and he made up policy on the hoof. That's after the shadow transport minister defied Sir Keir's ban on joining the picket lines with striking rail workers. Train services are still disrupted today after yesterday's strike, which caused immense travel problems. Unions have announced a further strike this Saturday and then once again on August the 13th. Sir Keir Starmer says trade unions will always be part of the Labour movement.
I think it's quite right for trade unions to stick up for their members and to fight for their members. Of course it is. And it's their members who are really struggling under this cost of living crisis. So, of course, trade unions are right to stick up for support and negotiate on behalf of their members. And I'm fully supportive of that and working with our trade unions.
And workers of Britain's biggest and busiest container port have voted to strike in a dispute over pay. Members of the Unite Union backed industrial action at Felixstowe in Suffolk by 9 votes to 1. The union saying an offer of a 5% pay rise is an effective wage cut because of the soaring rate of inflation. The NHS is closing its only gender identity clinic for children and young people, replacing it with a regional network. That's after it was told that only having one provider was not a safe or viable long-term option. The contract for the Gender Identity Development Service at the Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust will be brought to a close. The leader of a gang who smuggled over £100 million in dirty money out of the UK has been jailed for more than 9 years. In the biggest money laundering case of its kind, Abdullah Al-Falassi flew suitcases stuffed with cash to Dubai between April 2019 and December 2020. His mules carried up to £500,000 in cash in each suitcase, alongside coffee and air fresheners to put sniffer dogs off the scent. It was all part of a service the gang offered to money launder for dozens of drug dealers across the UK. The US economy shrank again in the last 3 months, raising fears of an approaching recession. The Commerce Department announced today gross domestic product decreased at an annual rate of 0.9% in the second quarter, after falling at an annual rate of 1.6% in the first 3 months. A former Russian state journalist has been found guilty of discrediting the country's armed forces. Marina Ovsyannikova rose to prominence when she denounced the Russian invasion of Ukraine live on state television. She was fined for the offence and was in court for allegedly asserting the illegitimacy of the Russian war effort in posts online. She's been fined 50,000 rubles, which is worth just over £675. That's it. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News and more news as it happens from us at the top of the hour. But for now, it's back to Brazier and in the seat today, Mark Longhurst once again.
Polly, thanks very much indeed. Yes, it's me, Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Colin this week, and you're watching and listening to GB News on TV, online and digital radio. Now, as families across the UK continue to see prices soaring, news today that household energy bills could be hitting almost £4,000 a year by January, were warned, more than £1,000 higher than Ofgem's predictions earlier this month. The National Energy Action Charity warning that such a sharp rise will leave millions unable to heat their homes this winter. But whilst those bills are going up, the owners of British Gas, Centrica, are resuming payouts to shareholders. They've reported soaring profits of more than £1 billion, or $1 billion rather, for the first half of this year. The boss, Chris O'Shea, acknowledging customers are facing what he called a difficult environment. So are we, the consumer, being ripped off by big business? Well, Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries spoke to GB News this morning and was questioned on this issue and what the government should be doing to support families.
Government is taking both a very serious and very coordinated approach to what we know is a serious problem as a result of what's happened in Ukraine, as a result of Putin's barbaric invasion. The government has, this is the top of the government's inbox list of priorities. We've put in measures in place. People have experienced that money, £1,200 for many people, into their bank accounts to help them deal with that problem right now. That is what the government's doing, and as the problem continues, then it's an issue we will continue to address. I can't tell you what policies are going to be put in place in the future. We've got a leadership competition taking place. We'll have a new Prime Minister on September the 5th. It was agreed that there will be no new policy announcements between now and then, and on September the 5th, this, I'm sure, will be the first problem to face a new Prime Minister.
Doris speaking to us a little earlier from Birmingham. Well, Malcolm Grimston's a senior research fellow at the Centre for Economic or Energy Policy and Technology, rather, at Imperial College London. I guess we couldn't get more of an expert than you on this, Malcolm. Let's just reflect first on this estimate of £3,800, £3,900 by January. Do you share that analysis?
Well, it could be right. I mean, the level of volatility in these markets from a day-to-day basis is extraordinary. Yesterday, the gas price went up 13% in a single day because of the problems around the Nord Stream pipeline in Germany. Now, to put it in perspective, that is more than the whole gas price was little more than a year ago. So inevitably, it's a bit of guesswork, but what we do know is it's going to be very, very high and very difficult.
And is this Putin weaponising, as has been said, the gas supply down this pipeline that goes into, I think, the Netherlands eventually, doesn't it?
It's very difficult to believe otherwise. The pipeline was down for its 10 days routine maintenance, but then at the end of that, the Russians are only putting 20% of gas through it. They're saying there's still technical issues to be dealt with.
Yeah, and they're blaming German turbines, which I think pushes the gas through the pipeline. I mean, do you buy that as well?
No.
OK.
I think, I mean, it's just possible, but it seems a dreadful coincidence with everything else that's going on that at this moment, a pipeline that seemed to be working perfectly well before the maintenance should suddenly have hit these problems.
And the other aspect is, actually, the Russians don't have to pump that much more extra because they're making the money on it as the supply dries up. So in terms of market economics, they're happy, their end.
And it's one of the very strange things with energy. We saw this, for example, in the big power crisis in California in the year 2000.
Yeah.
That producing less electricity actually gave you bigger profits at one point because people were so desperate for power that if one power station went down, the market price shot up to more than compensate. And that's a very difficult dynamic if people have got an actual financial incentive not to produce or not to pipe the gas.
And this is the issue, Christine. We heard Nadine Dorries saying it's going to be top of the government in tray come a new Prime Minister, September the 5th, 6th. Is there actually much they can do about it?
Well, I think what they can do, we were talking about this in the break, is actually stop throwing money at people who don't need it. I mean, I had forgotten that apparently I'm going to get £400 towards my energy bills. I don't need that. Very nice, thank you, but I don't need it. Why are we giving money to people who don't need it? I understand, of course, that means testing is cumbersome and it costs money, but through the benefit system, it slightly blunt sword, but I mean, we seem to be throwing money at everybody, which is not the right way to do it. An awful lot of people will be able to survive this. They may have to cut other things, but they will be able to survive, whereas millions at the bottom of the economic heap will not.
Yeah, heat or eat.
It will be, or neither.
Yeah. So given that, why no windfall tax? I mean, we were told a windfall tax is bad because it dissuades the energy companies from investing in new oil rigs and drilling and shale gas and the rest of it. But they haven't done that. Centrica has just given the money back to the shareholders.
Well, I mean, you should bear in mind, this is the first dividend Centrica have given since the year 2020. Right. And you cannot run big businesses raising money from people if they're never going to get any money back on that investment. The energy industry has not been attractive for some decades, actually. And any industry, if it's not attractive, you don't invest. One of the reasons we're in the mess we are at the moment is we haven't been investing in nuclear stations. We haven't been investing in alternative sources of gas.
Let me put something rather contentious to you then. I mean, Sir Keir Starmer said nationalisation off the board for rail and everything else. Would it be actually sensible to nationalise critical infrastructure such as our power supply network?
The actual network, the wires, are already a monopoly. They could be nationalised easily. I believe in markets generally, but the problem with electricity, where you can't store it, is that you need to have enough capacity that's not earning money for most of the year, but is available for those times in the deep midwinter when we need that power coming. And that's not attractive in a market. As I mentioned earlier, the market's actually got more of an incentive not to produce enough electricity, because then the price shoots up. So I felt that for electricity in particular, there's a different argument with gas, but with electricity in particular, it's so central to the whole of our lives, in our homes, in our industries, everything we do, our hospitals, we all depend on electricity more and more in the electronic age. And I do feel that the government taking a much more central view of making sure we're going to have enough power stations in 20 years' time, because markets don't do that very well.
Can I do one quick question?
Very quickly, yeah.
Am I right that China is buying gas from Russia, which will help to make up some of the shortfall of not selling it to Germany and the rest of Europe?
Well, China has been, yes, indeed, yes. And there's been an increasing flow of gas to the east. Yeah. The Chinese economy has a big bounce out of COVID, which we've seen. They really locked themselves down, as we know, during COVID.
Yeah. This is pushing the prices up internationally.
And indeed, yes.
Malcolm from Imperial College, as ever, thank you for joining us. Now, let's reflect on the politics once more, because Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak going head-to-head once more this evening, this time in the first of the 12 hustings. Now, the two Tory leadership hopefuls addressing Conservatives in Leeds, tax spending and, yes, these energy prices likely to be the key points of contention as the hopefuls embark on a summer tour of the country, taking questions from party members, and they will ultimately decide, don't forget, who gets the keys to number 10 in September. Well, earlier when she arrived in Leeds, Liz Truss addressed funding for the North.
Funding formula has been unfair on places like Leeds and places like Yorkshire, so I will fix the Treasury funding formula to make sure that this part of the country is getting a fairer share of government resources, because frankly, transport is much better in London and the South East than it is here in Leeds, and I will fix that.
Well, columnist and political commentator Tim Montgomery joins us now. Tim, talking of fixing things, we understand there might be another big U-turn from Boris's policies, where she's talking about putting billions back into these rail lines.
I think that would be a very good idea, Mark, actually, because there is an awful lot of focus at the moment on links between the North and the South, with, for example, the HS2 investment. But, if you try and cross the Pennines, for example, and go from Manchester to Leeds, as that report that you just aired was suggesting, those are the really bad links in the North. And so, actually, I think they call it HS3, which is, the possibility of a fast-speed rail link, east-west across the North rather than north-south. And I think if Liz Truss makes that shift, that would be a sensible change.
Yeah, and of course we'll link up with the east and west coast lines as well. But what would Rishi Sunak make of that? Because I think that the bill could be some 43 billion for that. And of course we saw with the HS2, the estimates as to what it was going to cost kept going up and up and up.
Always the same, isn't it, Mark, with these big infrastructure investments? They start off with one price tag, and they're often not just 10%, 20% or 30% bigger, but they can double or treble in size. But it's going to take quite a while for this project to sort of take off, as it were. There'll be 2, 3, 4 years, just doing the planning for it. So actually, big expenditure, even if Liz Truss announces it on day one of her becoming Prime Minister. Actually, the big expenditure on making that line happen is probably going to only really begin in the middle of the next Parliament. So cost overruns will definitely be a problem, but there won't be a problem for the immediate, cost of living challenge environment.
What about tonight, these hustings? I mean, it will be a fairly friendly audience, probably. They're actually selected as such. But we might have an interesting approach because Liz Truss obviously is going to say, she's a local lass. Rishi Sunak, I'm a Yorkshire MP. It's going to be a bit of a battle of how northern you can be.
It might well be, but I like the idea, Mark, that you think it could be friendly. I don't know whether you've seen some of the Conservative debates that have been taking place recently. And I do hope, though, that you're right. And it does turn out to be friendly because I'm a Conservative. I want the Conservatives to win the next general election. But there's been too much taking lumps out of one another, I think, in the debates we've seen so far. And actually, I don't think tonight is a head-to-head format. I think the candidates take place one after another. That was certainly the case when Boris Johnson went against Jeremy Hunt in the last elections of this sort. But of course, that doesn't mean that as they address Conservative supporters, Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss won't be making some, hard points about each other. I think the likelihood is we will see more aggression from Rishi Sunak. He's had a bad couple of days. He interrupted Liz Truss too much on Monday night at the BBC debate, and then he U-turned on tax yesterday. And so I think his campaign is a little bit in trouble. So he's the one who'll have to take risks tonight.
Very quickly, because you were advisor to the great and the good, how would you tell him to actually pitch it then for tonight?
I think he has to be the person that is like the truth teller to the nation, that says that we have some very difficult times ahead. Your report that you've just been airing on energy prices is chilling. The idea of an energy bill that's approaching £4,000. He needs to go back and emphasise more of his record when he was Chancellor, when he helped people through the furlough scheme. I think the confrontationalism towards Liz Truss that he's been showing so far, he needs to drop that. The Tory party does not like disunity, and those sorts of arguments, I think, will worry the average member in Leeds tonight if he continues to make them.
Yeah, and obviously maybe even cost in a general election. As ever, Tim, thanks for your opinion and joining us here on GB News. Let's get the opinion of Christine, because you were making a very interesting point earlier about this energy furlough to actually try and help out. That might be one of the things that can, get people on side.
Well, it might. I mean, I think this is Liz's to lose now, isn't it? When the whole thing started, it was regarded as this is Rishi's to lose, and then we've got rid of...
Because he was seen as the best prime ministerial candidate.
He was, and then, sadly, they got rid of people like Kemi Badenoch, which I think was a massive mistake. But anyway, we are where we are, and this is very clearly, she's way ahead, and I think... I'm sure he's learned his lesson about interrupting. There is nothing worse than people interrupting each other on television, especially, well, two women interrupting is about the worst, but a man being... I
won't interrupt and say anything.
I hoped you'd get the subtle point there. But, I mean, I think...
It's the timing.
His problem is that he has been the Chancellor for however many years. And he has put the taxes up, and everybody knows by now...
He's the one that got us into this.
The biggest for 70 years since the Attlee government, and he has broken the Tory pledge of no taxes. So whatever he says now can be seen as just pure electioneering. Why should people believe him? The other problem I think he's got, which apparently, I'm not a Tory member, when they get their ballot papers, an awful lot of them straight away put their cross and post it. There is apparently you can have a recall if you change your mind. But
oh, really?
Apparently you can. Don't ask me how that works. It seems to me
another U-turn.
Another U-turn on the path. But the very last of these 12 debates is going to be a complete and utter waste of time. So because most people will have voted
by then. Yeah.
So I think he's got a massive uphill battle.
Christine, thanks very much. You're watching Brazier with me, Mark Longhurst, in for Colin all this week, and it's GB News on TV, online, and digital radio for you. And coming up. Ministers being warned that cuts in defence spending and low recruitment for the armed forces could leave the UK unable to tackle major international crises. Major General Tim Cross will be having his say. First, though, an update on the weather.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest broadcast. We do have some scattered heavy showers across northern and western parts of the UK over the next 24 hours or so, but there's plenty of bright or sunny spells to come too. And generally the settled weather is down to high pressure, which sits to the east of us at the moment. However, as we end the week and go into the weekend, Atlantic weather systems will start to move in, bringing some stronger winds, outbreaks of rain too. Back to the rest of Thursday though, fairly cloudy end to the day. The best of the sunshine across southern areas, some heavy showers across parts of Dumfries and Galloway and across the borders too, but these should start to fade away as we head into the early hours. Some patchy rain across the Pennines too, but elsewhere generally dry and clear skies. Temperatures in the range of 11 to 16 Celsius in the towns and cities, so fairly mild night to come. Best of the sunshine first thing Friday morning will be across central southern parts of England and Wales. Still cloudy across parts of the Pennines up into the borders. Here some patchy outbreaks of rain, but it should tend to fade later on in the morning, though it will be replaced by sunshine and showers into the afternoon. Some of these showers bubbling up across Wales and the Midlands too. Elsewhere generally dry with sunny spells, temperatures low to mid-20s, highs of 27 Celsius towards the London area, so fairly warm out there tomorrow afternoon. Through the evening, 1 or 2 showers still possible, but these fading away. Generally dry for many across England and Wales as we head into the early hours of Saturday. However, Northern Ireland and Scotland will turn cloudy. Outbreaks of rain moving in from the Atlantic. Some of this will be heavy at times and some stronger winds too. But another mild night, 13 to 17 degrees in the towns and cities. So a sunny start across southern parts on Saturday morning. Cloudy, wetter conditions across parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland. This slowly spreading southeastwards into Wales, the West Country. Some patchy rain here, but the best of the sunshine holding on across the southeast. Similar on Sunday, showery outbreaks of rain, particularly across the north and the west. Temperatures above average still, 27 or 28.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to Brazier with me, Mark Longhurst, in for Colin this week. And you are watching and listening to GB News on TV, online and, of course, digital radio. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on, yes, those energy bills increasing once more. Sian, first of all, the next Prime Minister and Chancellor must stop energy corporations' cruelty, as she puts it, to consumers, especially after 2 years of a global pandemic. While Mark says all utilities should be nationalised. We were discussing that a little earlier, of course. The North Sea oil and fracking gases belong to the citizens of the UK, not companies. It's unlikely that would ever happen. He reflects as the greed for profits outweighs the good, but I live in hope of radical change. Raymond, meanwhile, saying everybody who uses electricity pays an extra 25% on top of their bill for a specific purpose. He says, green energy. Who has the right to take money from the public to build an industry for others to profit from? Question mark. Keep them coming, of course, to reflect your views as ever. Now to other matters, with ministers being warned that cuts in defence spending and low recruitment risks are leaving the UK unable to tackle major international crises, we're told. Last night, the Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey accusing the government of weakening the UK's armed forces at a time when the UK, of course, is facing greater threats. Plans to reduce the army to just 73,000 by 2025, meaning that recruiting has diminished by more than a fifth in the past year. Retired Army Officer Major General Tim Cross joining us now. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Major General. And this is all in sharp focus, of course, because of events in Ukraine, showing that despite all the issues of armaments and cyber warfare, we need boots on the ground very often.
Yes, we do. And when we talk about these deployments, we talk about small scale, medium scale and large scale. And what Ukraine is showing is that large-scale operations have not gone away. We, the UK, have deployed on a number of operations over the last 20 years or so. The large-scale ones were in the Gulf campaigns, which I was part of, but the Iraq and Afghanistan campaigns were more medium-scale. Now, what we've seen in the Ukraine is that, and statistics are always a bit dangerous, one needs to be a bit careful, but the Ukrainians have lost was casualties, either dead or injured, about the equivalent of the whole of the UK infantry. So we're seeing, large-scale operations in Ukraine, and we, the UK, do not have sufficient capability to fight at that level for a sustained period of time. The ability to deploy an armoured division with sufficient combat power to engage in large-scale war-fighting operations. And these reductions that we've seen going on over the last few years, they are putting us in danger. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Yeah. Is it also a problem of recruitment of personnel dropping? Because, we've got high employment at the moment, so therefore the recruiting officers are having problems actually attracting people in to come into the forces.
Yeah, there's a bit of both, I think. We talk about recruiting and retention.
Yeah.
And as you reduce the size of your army, you put more pressure on the people that are staying in. And so, less people want to stay in for longer. So it is about finding the young people to come into the military in the first place and then holding on to the people that you've got, particularly your trained and very experienced NCOs, junior and senior NCOs, and your officers, of course. And I haven't seen the latest retention figures, but as you recruit less, then less people think, they think they're joining a declining organisation. So why would you want to do that? I mean, the army that I joined was about 180,000. And it's not that long ago that we were 105. And the decision to reduce to these numbers means that we are recruiting less. We're seeing more people leave. And if we don't reverse that trend, then I think we will struggle to sustain the 72,500 that the government are talking about trying to hold firm to.
Yeah, and of course, the point being made, we couldn't fight another Gulf War, let alone a Falklands. But I mean, Liz Truss promising defence spending back up to 3% of GDP. But is it a case of how much there is to spend rather than where the money should be spent?
No, that's an important point. I mean, you wouldn't be surprised that, I served 43 years, man and boy, in the military, and I happen to believe that we still need, or we now need, bigger military capability than maybe we thought we could do with, only 5 years ago. But it's where you spend the money that counts. Now, traditionally, the Air Force and the Navy equip or man equipments. They man ships, they man aeroplanes and so on. The Army equips men and women to fight. And it's a very different dynamic. And the equipments in the Royal Air Force and the Navy are very expensive. And, they're very good bits of kit. The F-35, the Typhoons we've got, the carriers and so forth. I'm certainly not against those, but they soak up enormous amounts of money.
Yeah.
And where you then spend the money in the Army over its fighting vehicles and all of the supporting combat support, combat service support arms and corps and so on, and how you balance that with your infantry and so forth is not easy. So I'm certainly saying, I would say that we certainly need to be spending 2.5%, if not 3% on GDP. And then we need to think carefully where that money goes.
Major General Tim Cross, great pleasure to speak to you. Thanks indeed for bringing us your points here on GB News. And Christine was listening to that as well. this may be another sort of issue between both Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. I mean, 3% of GDP is a huge amount. I can't imagine Rishi Sunak wants that to flow out the door.
I wouldn't think so, but personally, I think it's incredibly important that we keep our conventional forces high. And if we haven't had a lesson from Ukraine, what sort of lesson
do you need? Yeah.
And now that we've got sort of, nuclear parity around the world, and the nuclear powers all know that, my goodness, we really can't do this, I think it becomes even more important, and Ukraine has shown us how important it is, and I think we need to build up, and America has already done it. They've committed a lot more forces to the eastern flank, to Eastern Europe, and the Major General was talking about these planes, the F-35s. They've committed a couple of squadrons of those to this country, apparently, so America is in favour of doing it, and I think NATO just needs to continue to do it. How you recruit the people, of course, is another question, and, of course, how you pay for it. But I think, one of the very first duties of any government is protecting...
To defend the realm.
Defend the realm, and I think we must not ignore the further potential of conventional warfare.
Christine, thank you for that. Well, coming up, indeed, we'll be asking how much of a threat China is to the UK. On this issue, the UK's National Security Advisor, Sir Stephen Lovegrove, warning of China's nuclear arsenal. First, so let's get all the latest news headlines with Polly.
Mark, thank you. The latest, a man has been jailed in the first ever televised hearing inside a criminal court in England and Wales. Judge Sarah Monroe QC's comments were streamed live from the Old Bailey this morning. She made legal history as she handed Ben Oliver a life sentence for killing his grandfather. Also today, Conservative leadership candidates Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are to face each other once again tonight in Leeds. They're taking part in the first of a series of 12 Tory hustings. Tax and spending likely to be the main topics of contention as they take questions from party members. They'll both be hoping to secure votes before their summer tour of the country. The NHS is closing its only gender identity clinic for children and young people and replacing it with a regional network. That's after an independent review criticised the Tavistock clinic, saying it needed to be transformed. The contract for the Gender Identity Development Service at the Tavistock and Portman NHS Trust will be brought to a close. And holidaymakers are facing roughly 2-hour queues now at the Port of Dover. Amid warnings this weekend will see longer delays. Check-in and border control for cross-channel ferries are once again suffering delays and disruption. That's after tens of thousands of families waited up to 6 hours at Dover last weekend. And the 22nd Commonwealth Games will begin in Birmingham tonight. The opening ceremony, which begins at 8 o'clock in the Alexander Stadium, will be attended by the Prince of Wales. Tom Daley is among those carrying the Queen's baton to kick off the Games. Those are the headlines. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News, and Mark Longhurst is back with the Brazier programme in just a moment.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
First, a quick snapshot for you of today's markets. The pound is 1.212 to the dollar. The pound is 1.193 to the euro. And if you want to buy an ounce of gold, it's going to set you back £1,446.49.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to Brazier with me, Mark Longhurst. Lots of reaction coming in from you today. Let's get your thoughts on the issue of the Army. First, Virginia has said that it doesn't matter how many soldiers we have, they'll be no good if the top brass think woke ideas are more important than fitness and discipline. On the leadership race for the Tories, Barbara saying Rishi does have an uphill battle in this contest. Why? Because people are dim. That's my conclusion. OK. Thank you for that. Keep them coming. Now, the UK's National Security Advisor, Sir Stephen Lovegrove, has warned of the threat that China, yes, China, not Russia, poses to the UK. In a speech at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies, he cited the proliferation and modernisation of China's nuclear arsenal. He also said that Cold War safeguards, which prevented the West from miscalculating a nuclear war, do not actually exist with China. Let's get the views now of Doug Stokes, Professor and Director of Strategy and Security Institute at the University of Exeter. Doug, thanks for joining us. Wasn't that long ago we were sort of hearing the warnings about Putin and his nuclear threat. Are we just trying to cover all bases now?
Well, it's a very good point. And I think what you're hinting at is obviously we are located in Europe, and there's a major war in Europe, i.e. Russia's aggression in Ukraine, but China's a long, long way away. And I think your last guest made the point. There's been quite significant defence cuts over a long, long time now, and are we just spread too thin? So I think that in 2021 there was the Integrated Defence Review, which still guides to some extent UK foreign security policy, but that was obviously came before the Ukraine crisis.
Yeah.
So I think that what we need to do now is to really rethink things and also get a sort of broader, bigger picture as well, not just on the operational and tactical level, but also on the sort of grand strategic level about what kind of foreign and security policy we need going forward into the future.
So changing our thinking maybe, because, of course, there were people warning about not just Ukraine, but the Baltic states as well, and similar warnings about Taiwan, which could be the critical point. And America has not really wanted to go too far in saying we will defend them, although they've said that now. And this really could be where China's a difficult issue to address.
Yeah, I mean, so for example, today I think Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker, and the Congress is off to Taiwan, and Biden can't stop her from doing that. And obviously, it's a major sort of big deal for China. I mean, China ultimately sees Taiwan as part of the Chinese mainland. It's kind of part of the sort of Chinese nationalist kind of ideology. So Taiwan is a big deal for China. But obviously, it's a long way. I mean, and the problem with Taiwan, obviously, is the US has defense commitments to Taiwan, and that's kind of vague. But broadly speaking, there's been a long-term defense commitment to Taiwan, and so obviously there's the chain gang problem. If China does go into Taiwan, if it fires at Taiwan, if it invades Taiwan, it could drag the US in, and insofar as it drags the US in, it could drag the other sort of democratic states into a much broader conflict with what is ultimately a nuclear-armed power, i.e. China, and also a very technologically advanced power.
Yeah. Well, let's address that issue of nuclear, because that's the big scare story, isn't it? I mean, what happened to that principle of mutually assured destruction?
Well, that principle exists, but the problem is, if you look at a lot of the war gaming around China, God forbid, but say, for example, a major war happened with China, the first thing that the West would do, the US in particular, would take out China's satellites and its communications technology. And so it would potentially cut off the Chinese leadership from the capacity to fire its own nuclear weapons very, very quickly. In other words, there's a very, very quick escalatory cycle that could take place over a very short period of time. So there are different war game strategies. I won't go too far into I can if you want me to, but I won't go into all the different sort of strategic ways of war with China.
Yeah.
That's a major threat, and so mutually assured destruction does actually exist, and obviously the whole logic of nuclear deterrence is because ultimately, if you go to war, two nuclear powers go to war, you are talking about mutually assured suicide because there's deterrent capacity there.
Doug, finally, what's your assessment of the situation with Ukraine? I mean, we're getting some reports that Russia may have lost half of its capability in infantry through deaths and injuries. I mean, do you share that sort of assessment?
Well, I think basically Ukraine has been an absolute strategic disaster for Russia. It couldn't have gone worse. Not necessarily talking about what's happened on the ground. There's a report today, I think in today's Telegraph, picked up on the damage done to the Russian economy. But going forward, I mean, Russia has overplayed its hand, but it's now very much contained, economically strangled. It's a vassal, little more than a vassal state of China. And and this isn't a great thing necessarily. It's a good thing strategically, but it's not good for the Russian people. But Putin's aggression in Ukraine has really set Russia back. It now has NATO right on its borders, i.e. Finland and Sweden. Finland has massive artillery pieces. So it has it all. So it's completely contained, and it's a losing game for Russia.
Doug, at the University of Exeter, thanks very much indeed for your expert analysis of the situation. Thanks for your time. Well, let's get the views of Christian, because you were indicating that it's not just, of course, the issue about our domestic army, but we've still got this threat out there, and perhaps we've taken our eye off China when we've been concentrating so much on Russia.
Possibly, but I mean, China, of course, has given a tacit and possibly even more support to Russia over Ukraine, haven't they? The Russians asked them for military and economic support. I'm not aware that we know whether they did or they didn't give it. But, I mean, they're hand in glove over all that. And I think it's a sense of pride for Putin. He regards Ukraine as part of Russia, and China regards Taiwan as part of China ever since Shanghai.
So it's the same mindset.
It's the same mindset, and it's a point of pride. Well, I think Taiwan would be a lot less easy to take. Not that Ukraine is proving a pushover, and I don't think Russia will succeed. I pray they don't.
Yeah.
I mean, the island.
I think Washington has too said about Taiwan. No further.
It's armed to the teeth, and it's an island, so I think it would be pretty difficult for the Chinese, and I think they realise that really would be
still frightening times.
But I think, China has apparently increased its military defence spending, increased it by 7%. I mean, I think they are absolutely the ones to be feared, and their tentacles are going all out their hegemony all over over Asia,
Japanese islands.
Absolutely, and I think the spread of their authority and all over the world, I can't think of the word, is really frightening. I mean, they're going into Africa, they're buying out companies. I mean, we had all the row here with the whatever the 4G company was. Huawei, that's right. We all learnt how to pronounce it. So, I think China is a very terrifying prospect.
Christine, thank you. Let's just reflect as the clock keeps ticking. We're just over an hour away now from eyes on Birmingham, with the city opening the Commonwealth Games, a spectacular ceremony celebrating the city and the region at the Alexander Stadium. More than 1 million people expected to descend on the city for some 11 days of sport. Athletes representing 72 nations and territories, including, yes, the Norfolk Islands, competing across 19 different sports. Well, like the London Olympics back in 2012, the hope will be that the Games leave a lasting legacy for the West Midlands. Now, the Sandville Aquatic Centre, the only brand new venue for the Games, and to be handed over to the local community later this year. The area, one of the 20% most deprived districts of England, around 25% of children living there in low-income families. So the investment, important moment to change lives there. One of those lives, Liz Wilkins, member of Sandville Aquatics Club, a newly formed of 3 swimming groups in the area. Liz, thank you for joining us. You've been swimming in Sandville since the age of 11, and I think waiting for this sort of investment since, what, the 1960s?
Definitely. I joined Smethwick Swimming Club when I was 11, and as a teenager, growing up in the 1960s, we talked about the clubs joining together. We talked about having a new swimming pool in Smethwick to replace the old pools that we currently train in. And it's been a long time coming, but I have to say that this superb facility that we've got now, it exceeds all our expectations, all our wildest dreams.
Yeah, you say swimming pool. This is an aquatic centre. It looks absolutely amazing. I mean, what's going to be the reaction of local groups there, do you think?
Well, we're super excited about it. We can't believe it. We did one of the test events there back in April, and we put on swimming and water polo events, not only for the members of Sandville Aquatics, but for the members of other West Midlands clubs as well. And I think it was during that event that it actually began to dawn on us that in 12 months' time, this will be the pool that we call home. We've got this amazing facility, and this is where we'll train. It's where we'll play our water polo matches. We'll put on swim meets. So exciting.
And, of course, for the kids, because let's reflect that the immediate area outside this aquatic centre has not been perhaps best served over the years.
No, the pools that we've got are very, very old. It's a very diverse community. Lots of people don't learn to swim. And I think what makes this facility extra special, what makes this aquatic centre extra special, is that unlike a lot of facilities like this, it's not in a city centre. It's actually in a park surrounded by people's homes. And when this gets handed over to the local community, this time next year, I think, it really is going to be people's local swimming pool. And they can just pop along to the gym, to the swimming pool, to the football pitches that are going to be in the park outside. Absolutely amazing.
It's going to make, let me pardon myself for this, a bit of a splash. Thank you very much indeed for joining us there. Enjoy it, and all the other swimming clubs as well. Great stuff. Thank you for your time. Now, let's reflect that the much-loved English actor and performer Bernard Cribbins has died at the age of 93, amongst countless other roles, narrating all 60 episodes of The Wombles. He played Wilfred Mott in Doctor Who, starred in The Railway Children. Doctor Who writer and producer Russell T Davies paying tribute to what he said was a national treasure this morning, stating that a legend has left this world. Well, joining us now, singer, songwriter and creator of the Wombles band, Mike Batt. Mike, thanks very much for your time. And he really was very well loved and really added, a superb extra dimension to the Wombles, didn't he?
Oh, he did. He added a lot more than people might think, because the scripts he was given to those voiceovers were very minimal and probably, a few lines on a page. And he so much enjoyed telling me when we first started working together how little he had, and he, the specialness of the character, was brought about by his improvising things like these little mumbles and things they might say on the side, little asides, like Tobermory might enter into the workshop and he might be going, I don't know what I'll do about this. And I think I might hurt my finger if I did that, and he'll make it all up as he went along. He was so creative, and that we're only talking about that. I mean, the fact is the man was such a great actor. To do that, comedy is the hardest kind of acting anyway. I think most serious actors will tell you that. Yeah.
Well, I remember him in some of those great black and white comedies of the 50s and 60s alongside the likes of Peter Sellers. I think Long Arm of the Law was... his comic timing was absolutely superb.
It was. It was a natural. Actually, funny enough, I'm standing, forgive the background noise, I'm standing on a street in Ealing, which reminds me, he must have been in all those Ealing comedies. I can't remember which ones.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not only that, he was a very good straight actor. I mean, I think that's why I was theorising earlier when I was talking to somebody else about it. He had such a sort of what's the word, simpatico kind of character himself.
Yeah.
He was so sort of nice to people. I think because he could empathise with how the people in real life that he dealt with, and he would bring that to his acting. And if you like, sort of inhabit the character you're acting from your experience with real people, I think that's what he had, that kind of real feeling for people.
Yeah, and with your musical hat on, I'd forgotten, of course, he did that wonderful record, Hole in the Road, which I seem to remember was produced by no less than George Martin on Parlophone.
Yeah, Hole in the Ground, yeah. And the other one that he did was about the one about there I was digging a hole.
That's the one, yeah.
You're talking about.
Yeah.
Then there was one about getting a piano up some stairs or something. I forget what the other one was called. I'm told everyone's screaming,
Or does your chewing gum lose its flavour on the bedpost over the night? Maybe I don't know. Was that someone else?
That was Lonnie Donegan.
Oh, no, of course, yeah.
I'm trying to think of the other one was. The minute I put the phone down, I'll remember it. But no, he was. And I actually made a single with him, which sadly wasn't. And he and I sort of wrote the song together. It's called "The Ballad of Captain Cutlass," and it was sort of funny, the Victorian sort of music hall thing. And we had a lot of fun together when I was. We were both much younger when I saw more of him. I worked with him only about 4 or 5 years ago on something, and he was, I've known him, all my life, but I definitely got to know him when I was I had no track record to speak of, and he was the great Bernard Cribbins, and it'd be wonderful fun. He didn't discriminate between, somebody who was or wasn't George Martin, I wasn't comparing myself to George Martin in any way, by the way, by saying that. But, he was just nice to everyone. And I think that served him well. And, of course, I don't think he did it cynically. I mean, how can he be nice to people cynically? He just had it. That was just who he was.
Mike, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us about Bernard here on GB News and remembering him in such a fond way. Thanks very much for your time.
Well, thank you very much.
Cheers. Christine smiling as well. Isn't it great to remember someone with a smile on your face? I mean, I remember all those wonderful movies and that song. We always used to be...
Right Said Fred. Yeah, that was one of my favourites. Right Said Fred.
With Stewpot on Junior Choice on the radio. Yeah.
Well, what I love about Bernard Cribbins is, I mean, he's been acting for 7 decades. That's my entire life, so I don't remember life without him. And every generation has a different memory of him. I remember him in the Carry On films and the Ealing comedy, but then Doctor Who and the Wombles. I didn't even know that he'd narrated the Wombles because I was kind of past it then. And he was Ratty in Wind in the Willows.
Yes, of course.
But everybody who remembers him, whatever they remember him for, it brings a smile and a warmth and an affection. He was in Carry On, Ealing comedy, Bond films, and Hitchcock. I mean, that's
what a legacy.
What a legacy, and that's just 4.
Yeah. Great, Michelle. And coming up as well, thank you for that. Michelle Dewberry with Dubes & Co. Right Said Michelle.
Yes, I was enjoying the singing there, what can I say? Much of which I'm too young to remember, what can I say? Coming up on my show tonight, Mark, we'll be looking at Liz Truss. She's coming up with all kinds of ideas when it comes to clamping down on crime. This whole phrase, back to basics policing, is that what we need to return to? One of the chiefs in Greater Manchester thinks so. He's taken it right down to people need to start polishing the boots and pressing the shirts. Is that the answer to fixing crime in Britain? Also, we'll be looking at the news that the Tavistock Clinic, the gender identity clinic for children, that has now been forced to close. So we'll be exploring whether or not that's the right decision. And Council House. Should anyone be entitled to one? The RMT deputy leader, he's got one despite earning £78,000 per annum. So should there be a point when your earnings mean that basically you've got to pack up and leave your council house behind?
Michelle, thanks, and catch up with you in a moment, of course. But that's all the time we've got for today. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this week. Been a great pleasure to have you along. Thanks for all your views too. Colin back with you on Monday.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest broadcast. We do have some scattered heavy showers across northern and western parts of the UK over the next 24 hours or so, but but there's plenty of bright or sunny spells to come too. And generally, the settled weather is down to high pressure, which sits to the east of us at the moment. However, as we end the week and go into the weekend, Atlantic weather systems will start to move in, bringing some stronger winds, outbreaks of rain too. Back to the rest of Thursday, though, fairly cloudy end to the day. The best of the sunshine across southern areas. Some heavy showers across parts of Dumfries and Galloway and across the borders too, but these should start to fade away as we head into the early hours. Some patchy rain across the Pennines too, but elsewhere generally dry and clear skies. Temperatures in the range of 11 to 16 Celsius in the towns and cities, so fairly mild night to come. Best of the sunshine first thing Friday morning will be across central southern parts of England and Wales. Still cloudy across parts of the Pennines up into the borders. Here some patchy outbreaks of rain, but it should tend to fade later on in the morning, though it will be replaced by sunshine and showers into the afternoon. Some of these showers bubbling up across Wales and the Midlands too. Elsewhere, generally dry with sunny spells, temperatures low to mid-20s, highs of 27 Celsius towards the London area, so fairly warm out there tomorrow afternoon. Through the evening, 1 or 2 showers still possible, but these fading away. Generally dry for many across England and Wales as we head into the early hours of Saturday. However, Northern Ireland and Scotland will turn cloudy. Outbreaks of rain